Hope everybody's doing well today. I want to welcome everybody to the Unimpressed podcast today. And today we have a very special guest calling in from Virginia, and his name is Dr. Greer. And he's been involved in a few books and has a new documentary coming out called The Lost Century and How to Reclaim It. Welcome, Dr. Greer. How are you doing today?
Good. Thank you. Glad to be here with you.
When I looked at your information and understood you were from North Carolina, a lot of things resonated with me, and saw you went to App State and so forth, very familiar. And you being a doctor, if you will, what led you down this path to get into the material you're exploring today?
Well, when I was very young, I was about 8 or 9 years old, Charlotte, North Carolina. And I was out mid-afternoon with some friends and my twin sister. And we looked up and there was what the public calls a UFO, crystal clear in the day, light shining, the sun on it, not that far away from us, and it appeared and it just vanished. It didn't move off. It just literally like it dematerialized right there. Now, so I knew I'd seen something extraordinary. My, of course, parents thought they didn't see anything. By the way, parents should believe their children more. But what happened from there, it ignited a lifelong interest in this. So I began looking into it when I was quite young, and it coincided with when my uncle, my mom's oldest brother, who also grew up in North Carolina, went to NC State. He was an aerospace engineer for Northrop Grumman. And back then it was Grumman designed. He was working on the team that designed the lunar module, the machine that landed on the moon the first time with Neil Armstrong. So there was a lot of space interest that I had, and it coincided with the sighting of this UFO. So it became a lifelong interest, and it proceeded to build. And I had a major sighting and contact event later in my life when I was 18 up in the mountains of North Carolina, up on Riches Mountain above Boone, North Carolina, actually. And it was a phenomenal experience, very close up. And I began to realize that we were dealing with civilizations that were not human, but highly evolved and highly intelligent. And so I began to develop a protocol to attempt to contact them. I'm an 18-year-old guy, and began to develop this technique. And people can go to the app store and you'll see there's something called the CE5 Contact. And it's an app that trains people in how to do this. But what I became convinced of is that these civilizations were totally non-hostile and benign. However, they seem to be extremely concerned with the direction humans were going. Now, remember, this would have been October 1973. You know, we almost went to World War III during the Yom Kippur War. People who know the history of that in the Middle East, etc. So I kind of became convinced that there was a big story here that no one knew about. But as an 18-year-old, you don't know what you're going to do with it. And this evolved. I mean, we'd take the whole hour to tell how I ended up where I am now. But suffice it to say, in 1990, I started a formal institute to research this issue. I'm a doctor. I did a Chapel Hill, UNC Chapel Hill residency, and was practicing as an emergency doctor in North Carolina. I became convinced that it was time for me to step into this further. And so we did. And I led a CE5 contact team on an expedition, let's call it, down to Florida. And we had 4 of these UFOs appear in the sky that were filmed and photographed. One of those photographs ended up on the front page of the Pensacola paper. And that got the attention of the intelligence community, including a friend of the soon-to-be director of the CIA, and the head of Army Intelligence, General Albert Stubblebine III. And so I started this project out as sort of starting a team of humans to be, as it were, let's call them ambassadors to these civilizations, to reach out, research it, make contact. And then it pivoted very quickly to what we call the Disclosure Project, because within about a few months of that event, I found out that there was an illegal secret government running projects related to this for reasons that were, the best way to put it would be fascistic and criminal. I was asked in December of 1993 to come up here to Washington. I have a home near the White House also, and brief the sitting director of the CIA for then president, newly inaugurated President Bill Clinton, because he went into office in January of 1993. And that's when my life turned upside down, to be honest, because I realized in the memo, the FedEx I got from my contact to the CIA director. It was very blunt, saying that neither the president nor the director of the CIA have access to these projects. And of course, through family and other contacts and an early group of, let's call them whistleblowers, who were on the inside, they knew I had information, so they wanted me to share it. And so I did so. Now, I have to say I was deeply skeptical. I thought, well, this spy master, the CIA director, surely must have been read in, as they say, or briefed on this. It turned out he, honest to God, didn't know anything. And in fact, had been actively blocked, as had the president and one of the president's good friends, Webster Hubbell, who was a Department of Justice guy. So one thing led to another. Now, you have to understand, I'm working full-time as an emergency doctor with 4 children. At that time, I was living in Asheville, North Carolina, right next to Biltmore House, and then flying up, going to Washington, doing these clandestine briefings as a public service. So our group has always been public interest, public service group, and we've done this without pay and without support for now 30 years. But it led to me discovering why. And the how of the secrecy is difficult. The subject matter is so shrouded in myth and nonsense. I mean, if you Google the subject, 99.999% of everything that comes up is rubbish. But at the core of it was something quite profound, and that is, number one, the entire constitutional government of the United States and other countries had been decapitated on this issue. And basically subverted. And secondly, what they were hiding were technologies, and this brings us to this feature film documentary coming out on June 6th, that if it was disclosed would completely end poverty in the world and end pollution and start a new civilization. And these are very high energy physics. Some people call it trans-dimensional physics systems, which I've studied very much in depth over the last 30 years. And those bring in what they do. They actually tap into what's called the quantum vacuum or 0-point energy field that's all around us. And it gets into some of the quantum concepts of entanglement, where every point in space and time is connected to every other. But to make it simple, just visualize that the space in the room where you're sitting, John, if you were to take the space inside your coffee mug or glass, there's enough latent energy in that amount of space, embedded in space time, to boil off all the oceans of the world. Now, that has been calculated. Now, that calculation and what have you was done in the 50s by a Professor Casimir, Casimer. It was called the Casimir effect. Later, he called it the 0-point energy field. And physicists agree it exists. What they don't know at MIT and Harvard and Chapel Hill or wherever is that, in fact, very advanced systems have been developed over the last 100 years, going way back to the 20s and before, by Nikola Tesla, that can tap into that energy field and would give you a boundless, infinite amount of energy at zero cost and zero pollution. Now, of course, you immediately realize then why is the secrecy around UFOs? Because go look at the CNN footage and 60 Minutes on CBS and Fox News, whatever, of our Navy jets chasing that object off the coast of California, the so-called Tic Tac. Mm-hmm. Number one, people don't realize that was ours. That was Lockheed Skunk Works. It was not extraterrestrial. And number two, it has no jets, no rockets, and no atomic or nuclear power plant on board. There's no heat signature. So you immediately realize it's using a propulsion and energy system that is tapping into some sort of ambient or existing field. And that, of course, is what Nikola Tesla stumbled across back in the earliest 20th century. But so what we have are very powerful industrial interests globally then and now. It's no different now from 100 years ago, frankly, who do not want that out, because you're talking hundreds of trillions of dollars in oil and gas and coal and nuclear and wind and solar and public utilities and et cetera. That would be like a stagecoach. I mean, they would be completely unnecessary. The second reason for the secrecy, a little more frightening than that even, is that the group that has controlled this would like to present, pivot now and drum up the music for the movie Independence Day and Alien and all the others in Hollywood, a false flag, a threat from outer space, which absolutely doesn't exist. Now, I have pointed out that the UFOs are a dire threat to the national security, but not the extraterrestrial ones, the man-made ones. And I tell people, don't take my word for this. Look at why the second CI director, who was there around the time of the famous Roswell crash and retrieval of an extraterrestrial vehicle. That CI director, Admiral Roscoe Hellenkeeter, he wrote the New York Times in 1961, and he said, and I quote, "The secrecy around UFOs is a threat to the national security." So, unfortunately, what happened during Eisenhower's administration later, like in the 56, 7, 8 period, is that a group of industrialists, military and intelligence guys began to subvert the Constitution and the president, Eisenhower. Eisenhower was getting older. He was tired after World War II, and he was in his second term as president. And unfortunately, he lost control over those projects. This is a fact, and it's been out of control ever since. It is an illegal secret government program. And my favorite comment on this was an older, he's retired, I think he's passed away now, senator from Hawaii, Senator Inouye, where Senator Inouye said, there exists a secret government with its own Air Force, its own Navy, its own funding mechanism that's above the law and free from the law itself, i.e. completely illegal and unconstitutional. Now, the reason I cite these figures in history is that there are a number of people who try to give people a little peek behind the curtain of what's going on here. But they don't take it very far because they're intimidated and threatened. So our project, the Disclosure Project, has been the lead group in the world moving this information to the public, but also trying to get members of Congress and the White House, whoever's in there, of course it rotates every 4 to 8 years, educated on the issue and begin to take action. The good news is last year, right before Christmas, the Congress passed and the president signed a mechanism for us to bring in a lot of top secret whistleblowers into DC and have them give testimony legally and formally. So that process is ongoing, and we're very involved in that.
If you take two thought processes, and I've talked to Avi Loeb, has been on my show, and always use Avi as an example. And what I discovered is, a lot of the intellectual individuals in these spaces, in a way, have blinders on. And when I say blinders, they're looking for discovery within their space, right? And they're not looking to see where things can connect. So if you think of, I reverse engineer everything, and I've created this process, and I have quantum physics coming through and information coming through all the time. And if you approach things from a discovery mindset, it's very hard. It's going to take longer to determine the answers. But if you can come at this from a creation mindset, let's say if you understood, how the universe was created and everything was linear, and mathematically tie that information into Earth, and you understand that foundation of creation, it's going to show you the wrong answers. Because I made this process of using content and eliminating a bad customer or bad fan, because I eliminated unconscious bias. Yeah. So when you understand to eliminate unconscious bias, I have this information, I have this idea of how things were created. If you understood how the universe was created, and I've had some of this information come through, and I think the universe was created mathematically, structured mathematically a certain way. If you could understand that foundation, would this not give more answers of where the wrong decisions have been made and help someone with your journey and what you're trying to accomplish?
Remember, it's all through a glass dimly, because everyone thinks that they've discovered everything that exists. This is the hubris of priests and scientists and doctors and everyone else. We're a victim of our own. What was wonderful from the Vedas, the world is as you are. So it's well now established, and Einstein called this the spooky effect, but that the universe, the cosmos, the creation is in fact a conscious quantum hologram. And every point in space and time is connected to every other. And at its root, there is a conscious element of it, a consciousness element to it. So it's a very complex story. Now, if you're strictly in a linear world of mathematics, you're not going to get there, except derivatively. But I mean, we're getting into weeds here. But what I'm saying is that this is important, because when you talk to folks like Avi and others at Harvard, they're within a certain box, and that box is very much, as you said, blinders on. But the other problem with it is the compartmentalization of this kind of knowledge. Like recently, I've been working a great deal with a man in Washington who manages the black budget of the United States and oversees the three-letter agencies. Now, everyone in the United States and elsewhere would think this man would certainly have been read in or briefed on anything this important and sensitive. He knew nothing about it. It was completely compartmented in an operation that was not being overseen by the intelligence committees or the White House, national security people. If you don't know what you don't know until something is open to you. And this is not like open scientific discovery when you're dealing with this kind of complex issue. If it was just a scientific problem, the science of this has been settled, by the way, long time ago, 50s, 60s, the propulsion systems, the energy systems, non-locality, quantum entanglement, that's all settled and was discovered and reverse engineered and done, but not long around the time I was born. In fact, we had electrogravitic, so-called anti-gravity, propulsion and energy systems. October 1954 was when we mastered gravity control. We have people who've been in the, quote, intelligence vault and have seen the documentation. So I think that the problem is if you're the top physicist in the world at Harvard, MIT, and Caltech, it isn't really going to matter because you have not been privy to those breakthroughs. And this is one of the real, I call this the big cosmic brain drain that's happened because people have not been allowed to know even the fundamentals of the science that were being worked out in classified, very tightly held projects beginning in the 40s up through now. And this means that the world in our country has been deprived of an enormous amount of knowledge, and much of it not just theoretical hoo-ha. We're talking the fundamentals of how we live as a people on this planet, which is rapidly cannibalizing and destroying the planet. But forget that. Even if you don't give anything to care about the earth and the environment, there are 3 billion people on the planet who have nothing to eat except what they can scrub up. And they're cooking it, by the way, by cutting down rainforests and desert shrubs. That's 3 billion with a B. This was just in The Economist last year. Mm-hmm. So I think that there's an enormous existential crisis for our civilization. And much of it is completely unnecessary and artificial. It's a construct. And it is rooted, quite frankly, in something that most people giggle about, UFOs, extraterrestrial intelligence, et cetera. And the reason the CIA began to engage Disney back in the 50s to make cartoons about this was because they wanted it to be the subject of ridicule and kooks and silliness. And they succeeded. And so the public is very unfortunately easily influenced through these sort of psychological warfare campaigns. I mean, if you doubt it, go back and look at what we did with COVID. And on top of that, before that, after 9/11, where they concocted fake evidence so we could go into Iraq, even though Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with 9/11. And that's been well proven. That's settled fact. Even Colin Powell, who was Secretary of State and had been the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he and his chief of staff had admitted they were played by Dick Cheney and his minions into forcing the country into this catastrophe. These are huge issues that go way beyond, theoretical counting angels on the tip of a pen, a needle, by academics. And I think that we need to make this something that the public understands what the implications of it are. Now, the science of it is very elegant and very interesting, although, it's very difficult, I think, for most people who have been educated even in quantum physics and their attempts to understand what's called quantum gravity, wormholes and the like, to kind of accept the fact that that was settled research back in the 50s and 60s.
Do we just settle for that? If I look,
I'm not. That's why I left my dude. I left my medical career and have given up over $12 million in income and my own savings to fix this problem. So yeah, I mean, most people are going to settle for it. The presidents that we've gotten this information to have walked away because they're scared shitless. Excuse my language. No, it's a very big problem, but it isn't going to be fixed by wishful thinking either. So this is why we have to educate ourselves and the public about it. That's why this documentary film is going to pull the whole curtain back on 100 years of this. What's been kept secret, how it's been kept secret, why it's been kept secret, and how do we fix it? The subtitle of the film is How to Reclaim This Lost Century. And there is a strategy that where I think it would work if we all pulled together to make this come forward. The other problem, however, is more institutional, political, financial, et cetera. Because you're dealing with a macroeconomic, the whole global economic situation that needs to take a big turn away from its current direction. But the ones who are stakeholders, I mean, let's say you control a $1 trillion oil field somewhere. This is not great news for you, because that oil will only in the future be used for plastics and things like that, not energy, which means you only need less than 1% of it or something like that. So I think that this becomes a big issue that becomes financial and then political and institutional. And the worst, I think, collusion, if you will, in keeping the secrecy going has been the media, the mainstream media, which we have clear documentation, and Air Force, a top secret Air Force guy who admits that, he would carry bags of cash to national security editors at media to get them to kill these stories on this subject. Mm-hmm. So this is there are a bunch of myths that Americans live under. We have a free press. No, we don't. We have a free market. No, we don't. It's a managed market. We have a constitutional Republican democracy. No, we don't. We did. There are a whole lot of fundamental problems that people take. And it's a lot of it, people believe in their own PR. They want to believe that, all is right in the world and God is in his heaven. But, the reality is that we're in a very serious crisis. Everybody knows it, can feel it in their bones if they're sentient at all. However, people don't know what to do about it. I think the reason we're doing this particular film right now, and a few days after it releases, and in Washington, D.C. on June 10th, 11th, and 12th, we're doing a big disclosure of all this information with a whole new wave of top secret whistleblowers coming forward at the National Press Club. And you're all invited to come and view it. If you can't be there, you can view it online, and hopefully you'll send your links out. And what we're trying to do with that is put that information out so it encourages the people who are in the Congress to step up the pace of their inquiry into this. We just had 12 senators write to the Pentagon complaining that they weren't moving quickly enough. And that's 1/6 of the U.S. Senate almost. So, and we have that letter, which people can see. And there are other people in the House wanting to do this. The White House military folks that I'm dealing with are also keen on trying to get to the bottom of this. But most of them don't know where to begin. The folks like you mentioned, Mr. Loeb, Dr. Loeb, he's not been read in to these, and he's not going to be. Now, the good news is the project that I direct, the Disclosure Project, now has 750 whistleblowers that we've identified. All of those are going to be handed over for eventually to come forward. And many of them, they go back all the way, some of them involvement in the 60s, 50s. They're very elderly. Some are quite recent in commands and in corporations, particularly Raytheon and Lockheed, Northrop, and a few others. So I think that what has to happen is that this has to come out in an orderly fashion, and the constitutional government and the people here and other countries have to say, we want to have this information. We're entitled to it. And we would like to see at least the first phase of these technologies released. Why would I be the first phase? Meaning something that would run your car, not like a Tesla where you have to plug it into the coal-fired power grid, but actually a device that would be a generator, electromagnetic generator that run the engine. And the startup on it would be a little small, maybe 3-volt battery. And you would never have to plug it in because there are no battery systems that run down. This so-called zero point or quantum vacuum energy. Some call it free energy. Tesla call it the infinite energy field. Those systems should have begun to come out in the 20s. And if they had, we wouldn't be facing this disaster, both social, politically, and economically, in poverty around the world. And that kind of extreme poverty of have and have-nots leads to all kinds of geopolitical instability and unrest. But we also would not have had any of the damage to the environment that we've seen over the last 100 years. Now, I think it can be reversed. What I find very exciting in looking at the whole array of these technologies that I've been briefed on and dealt with scientists who worked on them is that even the pollution we've created, up to and including nuclear and radioactive, can be reversed. The technologies exist to cleanse and fix that. So I tell people, and particularly young people, this is all very, very good news that these technologies are extant and can be brought forward. The bad news, obviously, is that you're dealing with an 8,000-pound gorilla. It doesn't want it out.
This is a rationale I came up with of, when we're born, our subconscious is being programmed. It's like a computer. And then we get into a certain point in life, we respond with our unconscious bias. And based on how heavy that programming is, and that's from your vibrations, that you experience. That's why people can't get to consciousness. So if you look at it from improving a human life perspective, if we're able to tap into this source, would it slow down the vibrations? Because if you understand vibrations and what that does to time, aging, and everything else, maybe that's why the source is there, because if we quit making this side that we're living in now, and we go over here and use the side that you want to use, would the vibrations not decrease, which would help humanity as a whole? Is that kind of it, breaking it down in a way?
I'm not sure what you're trying to
point out.
What I'm
saying
there
is the more vibrations we create, it speeds things up. If we're tapping into this energy source, would it slow down that creation that's going to make less vibrational field on this side, which creates, speeds up the aging process, speeds up, the earth around us. That's why we're having the problems we have. You know what I'm saying? Is this energy source going to slow that vibration down, which is going to give a better life for humanity?
On every level, because look, you're saying vibration, but most people are going to relate more specifically to the fact that millions of people die from just breathing particulate matter in the air from us burning stuff, exhaust. So you say that's a vibration, if you want to call it. You can call it pollution. I try to stay very practical. It's not that I'm not into metaphysics, but I'm a doctor and a scientist.
Yeah.
But more appropriately to talk about frequencies as opposed to
frequencies.
Yeah. But when you're dealing with these sort of energy systems, if they're very life supporting. In fact, ironically, if you were to walk into a hangar where one of these man-made UFOs is floating, because we have people on my team who've been in there, the temperature actually goes down. So instead of there being heating and waste stuff, it actually is more ordered. It's very interesting because it's not just that the consciousness would evolve rapidly. Why? Because when people are not in a polluted, filthy environment and stressed out trying to eke out a nominal living, which here in the United States, even the people who are on public assistance are wealthy or middle class compared to most of the world. Go travel. I tell people Americans should go to places. The poorest people in America would be considered middle class in much of the world. They're not having to cut down brushes to cook their food, which is 3 billion of 8 billion people. The point I make is that American narcissism notwithstanding, if you really look at this whole world, which we're on this planet floating through space together, liberating us from an 1800s paradigm of early industrial smokestacks and what have you to a system that isn't killing things. In fact, I always have said the world around us is a reflection of our level of consciousness, which is very destructive. And the technologies we have are all very destructive. We're talking on this system right here, which puts out radiation, but also is using fossil fuels for 88% of our electricity. That's damaging the air we breathe and the water we drink and the land and the crops and the food we consume. So I think that when you look at that, you realize that, all of this basically comes down to what the human conscious collectively wants to achieve and do. And why is it that people are happy with a status quo that is leading to an extinction level event, destruction? So when the solutions exist. Now, most people don't know those solutions exist. They don't know the science of it. Certainly the professors at Harvard and MIT and Caltech and what have you don't. And frankly, they think they know everything. And for that reason, they're not even going to consider it. It's not in their textbook and they didn't put it in their thesis and therefore it doesn't exist. They're not real science. Real scientists, take Nikola Tesla. They're going to actually go into what the truth of the universe is. And that's why, when the reporters asked Einstein, What's it like being a genius? He says, I wouldn't know. Go ask Nikola Tesla. Most people don't realize that. It's very interesting. But I think this is why we have to look at it as it is rooted, I believe, ultimately in a conscious field. What is our consciousness as a people? And what do we want for ourselves and our children? In my case, I now have 12 grandchildren. My grandchildren are the ages my children were when I started this effort. So I look at it as a multi-generational effort to transform away from a path of destruction to a path of healing and living in harmony with the earth. And yet I'm not talking about living in caves or living like in ancient times. We could have an extremely high-tech, advanced, abundant civilization, and at the same time have no pollution. That is what we have to present, because no one wants to go back to living like cavemen. On the other hand, we can't stay the way we are. As my Cherokee ancestors, my grandmother was Cherokee, of just going in and viewing everything as separate and tearing everything apart and just endlessly raping and destroying everything. So we have to find a better path, and there is. So luckily, there have been these wondrous discoveries over the last 100 years. But unfortunately, very corrupt and powerful interests have made sure they've been kept secret. And I will be very direct in saying, I've been dealing this week with 3 of our whistleblowers facing existential death threats and things of this sort. And so, I'm having to deal with some very difficult practical things right now, John. So, excuse me for not wanting to indulge in endless philosophical banter. I'm just not at the place right now. I'm dealing with some really seriously terrible situations, being quite honest with you. So now, all this other stuff, I became, interestingly, before I was a doctor, I became a meditation teacher because I became so interested in consciousness and the evolution of consciousness. And that was a result of the fact that right before I had this major contact experience with this ET group, I was very sick when I was 17, about 6 months earlier, and I died. I had a near-death experience, which I found, quite. My family were all atheist, agnostic, didn't believe in anything that wasn't in a test tube sort of people. This experience taught me they were quite wrong. That the reductionist view of everything was not correct, and that the consciousness, the infinite conscious field is actually where everything emanates from. And this is why when people come together as a group and a movement and an effort, things can change very rapidly, much more than just a few individuals, which is the value of heart-to-heart education. Because then that's, I grew up in the 60s with the civil rights movement. I'm old enough to remember segregated water fountains at the store where my father worked. I was run over by a car in high school because I had a black girlfriend in North Carolina. Or you're too young to remember those days, I suspect. But thank God that's not an everyday occurrence now. But I do point out to people that these sort of big changes that can be very positive happen when people come together with a higher purpose. And what is that? Well, a lot of people study field consciousness, the effect of people coming together. And I think as soon as enough people realize what is really the truth about this subject of UFOs, extraterrestrial intelligence, and the energy systems that run the UFOs, they're going to go, whoa, wait a minute. We want to change off of the path we're on now onto this other one. But it is an educational process. And not only for the general public, which the documentary film is for, but also when I do briefings for people in Washington. It's I won't say who, but let me just give you a short list of the people I briefed who have been denied access to these projects. Besides the CIA director, the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is like the CIA for the Pentagon, the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, members of the Senate Intelligence Committee, members of the House Government Reform and Oversight Committee, the presidents and the presidential staff and friends, the head of the United Nations, the ministers of defense of Canada, United Kingdom, and Australia. And I can go on. Now, the problem with that is that those folks who are ostensibly leaders, what are they leading? It's the blind leading the blind, because they've been left out of this information by illegal secret government projects that went rogue in the 50s. If this isn't fixed, we're looking at our civilization facing an extinction level event in the coming years. So I think we're going to have to, get serious about this. And the bony head academics are going to have to take a back seat for a little bit.
The right word be like a symbiotic energy. Would that be the right word of what this is? Because it's going to put you in a symbiotic way of life. I understand that. And when you talk about practicality, I couldn't imagine being a pioneer with this now that I get it more talking to you and understand the depth of it. So I applaud you for that. That's a big deal, being the lead on this, and someone's got to plant a seed somewhere to get that started. Intelligence and everything else could move a lot quicker if they could get to where you want to go.
Well, it would. I mean, the other thing, even the neuroscience studies and epigenetics studies, if you're scientifically oriented, when people, for example, meditate, it unlocks certain genes that we used to call junk DNA that's not. People's IQs go up. So what happens when a civilization goes from a sort of a grubbing, materialistic, terminal civilization like we are now, where there's infinite energy, abundance, no poverty in a generation, diseases are cured. They really will be. And there is enough time and focus to pursue what it means to be an advanced, intelligent life form, sentient human. I think you're going to see such a huge advancement in human civilization that in 100 years it would eclipse the previous 10,000. But so we have to make it over this chasm. And it's difficult because I'll never forget being with Lawrence Rockefeller, whose brother was David Rockefeller, Chase Manhattan. It's now JP Morgan Chase. And, the Rockefeller family, of course, oil, Standard Oil, became ExxonMobil, et cetera. But he was a huge supporter of what we were trying to do. He was very elderly. And it was a couple months before I briefed the CI director. And he took me out at night on this deck with a Native American on horseback. It's a Remington. Of course, they have all the originals, looking up at the stars. And it was this beautiful, poignant moment. He turned to me. He said, Dr. Greer, if this comes out, no aspect of life on Earth will be unchanged. So vast are the implications. I said, yes, Lawrence. That's why it's been kept so secret. Now, to most people who care about most of humanity, this is a very good thing. But if you are Goldman Sachs, and if you are JP Morgan Chase, and if you are ExxonMobil, et cetera, and so on, there are these multi-trillion-dollar transnational conglomerates. This is not very good news. And recently I was consulting with a very large mutual fund director who they managed about $2 trillion. And he was picking my brain of how to get ready for this. I say, because it's not if this is going to happen, it's when. And when it does, half their portfolio will be a penny stock. So, and so this gets into some very complex problems. And they were more complex now than if it had been fixed when I recommended that the President Clinton fix it in the 90s. But he was basically pushed aside and threatened. And so, and there wasn't a critical mass in Congress to pursue it. Now there is. It's very hard to have this fall on the president's shoulder as one man. But if there's also the other branch of government, the Congress, the judicial wing is not yet involved, but I think may get involved. By the way, any great lawyers listening, we may institute a civilian RICO suit, racketeering influence corrupt organization, because we can now prove through the witnesses we have, whistleblowers, that this is the world's largest, basically corrupt organization keeping this secret. You're going to have
Don't you think it's time? It's time because
we wanted to do this in 93, my friend. Look, I've been doing this 33 years. Yeah, this is what we recommended to the president in 1993. Now, although that would have been done a Department of Justice RICO suit. But I think that in order for this to get fixed, if we have any chance as a people going forward without losing billions of us, right, not to scare the hell out of people, but we're going to have to come together and realize that this is not the stuff of cartoons and idiotic UFO internet stuff. This is a matter of the gravest national security and implications for the future. And it affects every man, woman, and child, not just in America, but on the planet. The secrecy is killing the planet and destroying the body of humanity. The disclosure of this would actually heal the planet, literally, and release the potential of humanity, the human potential. So I think this is why, if it was just, I always joke, this is not about little gray men or little green men or aliens. This is about humans.
Mm-hmm.
And these extraterrestrial civilizations are watching, perhaps sometimes doing some things behind the scenes so we don't go to DEFCON 1 and blow the whole system up. Defense Condition 1, where you launch nuclear missiles. And there have been some interventions along those lines over the few decades. But I think that for the most part, those civilizations that are interstellar, they know the ball's in our court. This is our planet and we have to try to fix it. But most people have to have enough knowledge and information to begin to know really what the approach on this is.
Mm-hmm.
In the meanwhile, the most dangerous thing that's happening isn't anything I've talked about. It's the fact that, and we have people coming forward in June 10th, 11th, and 12th in Washington. Like anyone really interested in this needs to come to that, or at least get online and see it, who have knowledge of very advanced science technologies, neutrino light, active and passive systems, scalar, longitudinal, electromagnetic systems that are way faster than the speed of light, conventional light speed, that have been weaponized, that track and target these extraterrestrial vehicles and hit them and down them. We have in our research archive 119 incidences where we have downed extraterrestrial vehicles and killed their occupants. So this is very dangerous nonsense going on. And I always tell people, all the kooks on the alien subject, thinking that they're here to attack us. I said, look, if you're several 100,000 years more advanced technologically than we are, and certainly than we were in 1940s. If they were really of that consciousness, we would have been shut down immediately the instant we detonated the first atomic bomb. Why? Because everyone knows what an electromagnetic pulse is. It goes out from an atomic blast. What they don't know is that there is a scalar longitudinal signal that goes out that literally disrupts space-time and interstellar communication and transportation. So that's why when we started doing that, the skies over every one of our atomic facilities, uranium mines, nuclear missile sites were actively being surveilled by extraterrestrial vehicles, because we humans are an existential threat to elsewhere. But it isn't by a Star Wars boom, boom, shoot them up with a laser at the speed of light. We're talking about technologies that involve the entangled quantum cosmos that have been highly weaponized. Now, neither the president nor the Congress has been read in on those. And most of the people in the Pentagon, the secret group that has this, are, the best word would be sociopaths. And I think some of them are psychopaths. And it's out of control, has been out of control for decades. So this is another huge problem. Everyone's always fighting the last war. They're looking in the rearview mirror. They're not looking ahead. And so we need to have people sort of understand what the threat matrix is of the secrecy around this subject. And honestly, all of this was known by 1961 when the early CIA director, Admiral Hillenkoetter, said the secrecy around UFOs is a threat to the national security. He did not say the UFOs were. And at that point, we had only recently had the breakthroughs where we had man-made UFOs. Now, I will tell your audience about 70-80% of the objects that people call a UFO are not of extraterrestrial origin. They're ours. They're my uncle's companies, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, Lockheed Skunk Works, etc.
Do we know who to communicate with? I mean, is there good and bad? And I think somehow. Oh,
we know who to communicate. Yeah, the core project I run is CE5 contact. And we have had several thousand people, several million people. And I personally have led several thousand hours of expeditions making contact with these civilizations. And there's not a scintilla of evidence that any of them are quote unquote bad or hostile. Now, what's interesting, we've just uncovered through a log entry by Dr. Jacques Vallée, an astrophysicist. He had a cameo appearance in the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind back in the 70s, that he is in possession of a 1985 CIA document that describes the agency conducting alien abductions, fake alien abductions, for their, quote, psychological warfare value. I also have an Air Force Office Special Investigations guy who's come forward on videotape, you'll see it, who has stated point blank, yes, we are doing that. So I'll tell you this, a little knowledge on this subject is an extremely dangerous thing, because I will affirm that over 90% of everything out there on this subject has been embedded in the media and the internet and is false information, disinformation for its psychological warfare value. One of the documents we uncovered, or was sent to me after I briefed the CIA director, was an early CIA director named Walter Bedell Smith, 1953. And in it, it was a letter to the Psychological Review Board of the CIA, talking about the same language that was in that 1985 document about us conducting alien abductions or faking them in Argentina and Brazil. This particular document was saying we were doing this in other countries also. And same thing with the cattle mutilations. Those were all covert black projects. So those were done because they want people to believe there is a threat. Why? Because this military industrial fascist junta can then seize power over all the people of the world, not just one axis, like the Cold War or World War II. And that's actually been the 70-year defense plan that is very, very covert by this group. I have a member of my team who has seen that document, and now we're coming to the very end of the road. We're coming to the very end of that process. So this is a critical juncture we're at right now. It really is a critical point in our history. And, if they were to pull a stunt like that, I had a man who came to our briefings for Congress way back in the 90s. It was off-site. It wasn't sponsored by the Congress. It was people being invited. And it was a man who had been on an interagency committee back in the 70s, where he says, look, we can hit a button, boom, and these things that are the man-made UFOs, boom, they go up. Things could happen. It would look like an alien attack. He says everyone from the president on down would be convinced we were being attacked like War of the Worlds. He says and that's capability had been there a long time before I was in that command. So we have people who have operationally or tactically been involved with that. It's a very disturbing story. But remember, most people are too young to remember that the Vietnam War was boosted by us staging and hoaxing the attack on our own Navy vessels in the Gulf of Tonkin in the 60s. And the public outrage was so high that it caused President Johnson, to stampede into a vast escalation of the Vietnam War, which of course was a quagmire. And this is the sort of thing these manipulative sociopaths do. But they benefit a great deal from it, financially and in terms of geopolitical power. I think we have to learn to be very skeptical. The conventional information you get over the news media and on social media, I tell people, just be very skeptical.
So there's a lot of bullshit. I mean, I think we've run. I think. Well, when I think about its time is because we run out of narrative, and I've said this thing is we feed. I think we've culturally as the whole world feeds off what they see instead of doing what you're doing. Create. If you feed off what you see, you continue to create more opinions, more controversy. But if you create a new idea a new idea in a new environment, you don't have opinions. You don't have as much controversy. So I think it's creating that environment with a new idea and eliminating all the nonsense down here. Because like I said, there's no more narratives you can do. And it's crazy to me that you have that the dichotomy of that you're dealing with when you're talking to the sources that can get things done are not getting it done. It's like, I don't know. Well,
remember, all great changes in civilization have never happened from the center of power. They've happened from outside the center of power. And this is why I live down the road here from Thomas Jefferson's home, Monticello. We, the people. Why? Because it's the effect of the people. And there's such power in consciousness and action. The civil rights movement didn't come from edicts from the Kennedy brothers. They were dragged screaming and kicking into it. It was done by grassroots. Same thing with women's rights, rights for gay people. The people were trying to bring out new technologies. Here at University of Virginia, there was a medical doctor who discovered there was a bacterium causing many of the worst ulcers. And he was run out of the medical establishment because it ran against what the conventional wisdom of the academics and the pharmaceutical companies were saying. It turned out he was 100% correct. Now he's working in Australia. But it was one of the biggest discoveries in the treatment of peptic ulcer disease. It's the H. pylori bacterium. And you use some doxycycline, it gets rid of it, and your ulcer is healed. In fact, now it's medical malpractice not to test for it. But all big changes happen from people who have to go up against an established narrative that is resisted and fought. But I just think people need to understand that's how all great changes in civilization. I mean, when we try to separate from King George in the American Revolution, it was a ragtag group. It was unfunded, whatever, but they had another vision to create a place that would be free from that kind of tyranny. So I think this is exactly what has to happen. And I think a big part is going to come if in the next few years where native peoples of America and their descendants are going to get very involved with this, because there's a deep ecological and conscious message, and I will say spiritual message, at the root of what we're trying to do with this movement and this change.
When you talk about energy, I haven't said this, but I have heavy energy coming out my right hand.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something I've came into probably in the past 3 or 4 years. And both sides of my brain work at the same time too, is something I didn't realize was an oddity.
Oh, it is, yeah.
But when you think about that, I think the intentions of humans, both sides of their brain are supposed to work. When you think about you're a symbiotic energy, you're talking about symbiotic as a human being. And even if you look at Da Vinci, when he did the Vitruvian Man,
Yeah.
obviously there's a thread that's been going on for thousands of years, and we're here. I do think the bell has rung, and I hope everything you're trying to accomplish is achieved.
I tell people it's not what I'm trying to accomplish. It's all of us together need to do it, and that's why we need people's help and their support. And by the way, this documentary was crowdfunded. All of our educational films are crowdfunded by donations. We have all volunteer people. We don't have an office or staff or anything like that. It's just it's this labor of love. My wife and I work on this out of a corner of our living room.
Wow.
And yet it's become this global operation. So we need people's help. And, I hope people will give a look at this documentary. And if they can, come to the National Press Club event with us. We need a big showing there. And if you drop the link, if they can send it on to everyone they know, because then we're going to be able to get a lot of people who can't be there in person to see it online.
Yeah.
And that will cause a consciousness shift. So it's all about networking with folks like you. And I appreciate your help.
That is the documentary called The Lost Century and How to Reclaim It on
Right.
June 6th, 2023. Send us the link. We'll get it out to all our people on our network.
Yeah, actually, it's available on a pre-order now, so people can begin to do that. Yep. And also they can register for the conference in DC right now. So that link is available.
Nice. Well,
Yep.
I'd love to talk to you more off.
Yeah, let's do it again. Maybe, hey, you're not that far from DC. Drive on up. Come on up.
Cool.
Be good to see a North Carolinian there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good luck.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right, sir. This has been Dr. Greer, and I'm John Edmonds Cosmo, the CEO of Bang Productions.